Hello everyone, DonTheCrown here, and I just got back from Blizzard HQ, and I'm very excited about all of the Spiritborn stuff that's going to be coming out for the 18th, and so keep an eye out for that. But today we actually had a meeting with the Diablo IV devs talking about updates for Season 5. Now they kind of did give us a high-level overview of some of the changes. This is definitely not all of them, but on the Giga doc, which I will link in the description down below, there is a new tab now with Season 5 changes with a whole bunch of these stuff that they are changing for the game. Now I'm going to kind of blow through some of these. There's a lot of changes, especially for classes and stuff. And I've included some of the uniques that they showcased to us. I'll show you the picture of the old one next to the new stats, but most importantly, let's just talk about some of the stuff that they're changing, because a lot of this is actually pretty stinking cool. So first off, monster XP has been capped for a couple seasons now, but they are now making it so the XP from monster level is completely uncapped. So you get about 1.5% bonus XP per level that's higher than the player, which means you can like really level up so much faster. If last season took me about 13 hours to hit level cap at level 100, so this season's probably going to be like maybe 9 hours would be my guess, maybe even faster. I'm going to skip ahead one hot second here for something that's really going to help with XP, and that is a Helltide change. And they're actually keeping Profane Mind Cage in the game, and now they can be stacked up to 3 times, with each one increasing the monster level by 10 levels, which means you can get about 30% more XP just in the open world if you're doing Helltides. So these should be pretty effective for leveling up here, and it's pretty cool. Now next up, we have Enchanting is no longer use Angel's Breath. I know a lot of people have been complaining about that. CC time has been cut down, so you're not going to be crowd controlled as long, and now you can potion while you're crowd controlled, so you don't have to worry about getting frozen or feared or something and died as much. They also have increased the legendary drop rates post level 100 enemies, so you're really going to be motivated to kind of like push content and make it more difficult. It's not really clear just yet if it like scales up and up and up, or if it's just like a flat bonus. I would kind of hope that it's the type of thing where the higher level enemies drop even higher. This will definitely encourage you to go and do pit, go do higher level nightmare dungeons, and do like triple boosted Helltide zones when you're level 100. World bosses are also going to be a lot tougher now. Enemies or players are not going to be able to run up and just death touch the boss before you can then interact with it at all. But we're not really sure exactly how this resilience is going to work. I'm kind of hoping that it's a just a generic like max to how much damage they can take per moment, so it's not like a massive damage reduction, so that which would make it very difficult to kill these bosses at the start of a season. But we'll have to kind of see how this plays out. Also, if you're not aware already, but Uber Uniques are now going to be called Mythic Uniques. They now have their own like special purple color in your inventory, and there's a special purple beam, and there's a special like kind of loud gonging sound when they hit the ground. They made a ton of changes to Infernal Hordes. This is the new mechanic for the season, for Season 5. And they basically made it a lot easier for you to get compasses. As you can see here, Helltide, we're going to get 50% from chests. The special chests give you 100%. Whisper Cache is a lot more likely. And unlike in the PTR, you're not going to just be dropping tier 3 compasses, but you can drop 4 all the way up to tier 8. They're also craftable now with Sigil Powder, with Forgotten Souls, and upgradable still. So these are definitely going to be a lot easier to access. Definitely seems like you're going to be able to just directly farm these if that's something you're interested in doing. Also, if you're playing an Eternal and not the season, when you do the quest, you're not going to get like a World Tier 3 one if you're like already in World Tier 4 and like level 100 character. And so they just kind of clean that up a little bit. Now, in terms of in the Infernal Hordes themselves, they made some great changes. First off, they made it so that Burning Aether gets picked up from the pet. I always felt like it's kind of weird that they added this pet that picks up loot, but then didn't let the pet pick up the Burning Aether, and now they do. They also increased the pace of the mini events and just made the waves faster. So they're not going to take 90 seconds. Instead, it's going to take 60 seconds, but the like amount of action you're getting in that time is squeezed down. So like you're taking 90 seconds worth of combat now and squeezing it into 60 seconds. So it's going to supposedly feel a lot more hectic. And they retuned the wave counts to be like based around the timer. So like you're going to only get those monsters. They fixed the boss bug, which was supposedly making the council incredibly tanky in some parts. And they also just retuned the council so they're less tanky all over. They fixed a bug also that was, scaling that monster HP in the pit, so we shouldn't see that anymore either. They also made it so that the minimum amount of burning aether you're going to get per run is now like significantly increased. All sources of aether that used to drop 1 are now going to drop 2, and they added aether drops to the council. And finally, the box rewards have been significantly retuned in terms of cost. So where before the like fancy end game chest that gave you greater aspects cost 250, now it's going to cost 60 to crack open, and the other chests only cost 20. And there's still the option to trade in for gold. I'm not really sure if they changed those at all. Hopefully they do kind of crank up the gold reward a little bit, because right now you can make a lot of gold just from like selling one GA item on the marketplace. And well, this, like the Infernal Hordes kind of has to like compete with that a little bit. They did make some other Helltide changes than what we already talked about. So the heart drop rates are better than they were in the PTR, but probably a little bit worse than in Season 4. About every 10 chests, you're going to get about 3 hearts, but you do get 100% off of commanders, and you get chances off of like mastery chests from events, the boss that wanders around, and the world boss. So what they're really trying to do is encourage you to get away from just camping at the Blood Maiden for 40 minutes, then going and opening up all the chests. They are trying to like make sure that you actually go out and play Helltide, which I think is a good change. Now they did make it so that World Tier 1 and 2 are just better in general. So the chests now, so summoning the boss actually only costs 2 hearts as opposed to 3, and the Tortured Gifts cost is reduced from 100 cinders to 75. And like we talked about, the Profane Mind Cage stays now. You're going to be able to stack it up 3 times. They just talk a little bit about their philosophy for uniques. I can show you, see some of the unique changes up here, but generally their whole thought process is if it is a build defining unique, then for that build, it should be best in slot. And generic uniques that like kind of like have like kind of a general thing, kind of like a Fist of Fate over here, should be very niche for what they do. And ideally every single build would want 2 to 4 uniques, not counting mythics, which kind of makes me think that we're maybe looking at a meta here. We're going to end up wearing almost all uniques, which might be kind of bad for the whole tempering thing. But they also want uniques to kind of be memorable and fun or have thought-provoking affixes. And the strength of the affix should be balanced around the strength of the unique effect and all the other stats and stuff. Now, next up, there's some really huge cross-class balances. So if you're playing a Druid, a Necromancer, or a Sorcerer, now for every 8 core stat, you're going to get 1% multiplicative damage, whereas before it was 10 core stat, which means this is about a 25% just flat for free damage bonus for your character, which is just absolutely massive. Massive. Rogue gets 9 for 1%, which is about 11% damage bonus, and Barbarians get nothing because both Rogues and Barbs have more weapons, and those weapons come with more stats, and therefore they don't really need the help stat stacking. Now they did make a whole bunch of changes to the different classes. I'm going to kind of fly through a general overview. If you want to read this, like I said, it is all in the description down below. But basically Barbarians kind of got all of their key passives nerfed down. So Unconstrained got nerfed down, Walking Arsenal, Unbridled Rage, Gushing Wounds, all of them got nerfed. Realistically, Barbarians kind of been head and shoulders above every other class for a while now, and really this is just their attempt to kind of like bring Barbarian down to earth a little bit while bringing other classes out of the gutter, because like Sorcerer, for example, as you'll see in a little bit, really did need quite a bit of love and is getting it, which is really nice. I don't have the uniques for these. If you're a content creator who was in that meeting and have those uniques, reach out to me. That'd be nice. They also did remove some of the tempering. So Barbarian Protection, which was like giving lots of ranks of like more life and things like that, has just been completely removed. And Flay Duration has been moved back to weapon from utility. Moving on to Druids, things like Boulder and Cataclysm are a lot better. I think they said something about the new gloves that they were going to add for Cataclysm. They like reworked those all together to be a ring, but I can't remember the exact details of that as I was like still frantically writing stuff down. Like I said, these are just kind of like my notes, so some of the stuff might be slightly mistyped, But some other good stuff here. They did, for Druids, increase the Paragon caps for a lot of stuff. So Thunderstruck, Earth and Devastation, Survival Instincts, they've increased the caps. If some of these numbers look strange for like the old, it's because they're comparing from the PTR to what we're going to get in the season. And then several of the aspects got buffed here. And one of the things I kind of noticed here was Seismic Shift. Previously, this pretty much made Earth Spike, instead of being like a poke out of the ground, and like a line attack that did actually quite a bit of damage. Now it's not going to have a cooldown. It used to have like a 2 to 1 second cooldown on it, which I think kind of opens it up to be a new build here. Definitely some potential. And yeah, like I think this is generally going to be cool. Rune Workers, was this Rune Workers Conduit? They kind of like gave Storms a very similar thing to like what they do with like Rogue Grenades, where they have like the ability to have an aspect that increases the damage of all of the grenades. Now there's also gonna be an aspect that increases the damage of all your lightning bolts. So there's potentially another build there as well. Moving on to Rogues. Rogues didn't really get very many changes. Flurry got a pretty big damage buff from 94 to 130%, which is like a 38% boost. You got more lucky hit. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff here. So like Wind Force had this knockback removed, and from what I understand, the No Witness node, I think, kind of got, or I think it was Exploit Weakness. So I think in the PTR, this was making it so that you could potentially just like execute the entire screen if you got enough stacks. And they didn't like that. They didn't like people going into pit levels there where they really shouldn't be and just executing the screen due to their, you know, an effect. So they removed that and they kind of went back to how it was before. For Necromancer, one of the big changes is they got a ton of lucky hit changes. So all of these skills had, you know, lucky hit of this. Now it's changed to that. So really, they just like really polishing up the lucky hit chance of all of these different skills. And they also gave a lot of love to the Blood and Shadow Finesse tempers here, giving them quite a bit more damage, especially overpowered damage, which I kind of feel like is very justified because Barbarians were really abused. There's Barbarians again, were really abusing overpower. And so they kind of had to nerf a lot of the overpower stuff to kind of have them stop one-shotting Uber Duriel. And in the process, they kind of hurt other builds that were relying on overpower. Once again, we get a little bit of Paragon buffs here to increase the top end or just make certain nodes better. I think those are pretty good. And notably, Bursting Bones aspect. Now the damage area is bigger when you have a bigger bone prison, which I know a lot of people were talking about. And then lastly, we come to my favorite class, the Sorc. So fresh reminder that we got a pretty big buff, like a 25% damage buff for just having our intelligence ratio be increased. Well, also all core and mastery skill damage is increased by 15 to 20%, which means combined with the stat increase, we're looking at a solid 50% more damage for basically almost all Sorc builds, which yeah, is pretty nice. We'll see if that's enough, but hopefully it is. Hydra gets a little bit more love, which is pretty nice. Ice armor has kind of been like changed from how it was before, and now it's going to be base shield is going to be increased up to 56%, I believe, of your maximum life, which is a little bit different than it was before, because before you could like stack it up based on the amount of damage you were doing, and now it's just like a big shield. Warmth, I think, has the potential to be absolutely broken, because what it does is now it's going to give you healing from bosses has been increased to 4% per thing, and you can get warmth like +2 on a lot of spots. And I think if you hit all 3 tempers on a +2, you can go and get it all the way up to 6 ranks. And yeah, I think you can get it 4 places, so that would be 24 ranks, I believe, of this. So maybe I'm doing the math wrong there a little bit, but yeah, it's pretty crazy this season. Also, we have Align the Elements is giving us the DR cap from elites has been increased from 40% to 60%. I don't think that's all that big of a deal, because you do lose this damage reduction, I believe, if you take any damage from an elite at all, but it might prevent a like one shot as you walk around a corner. Mana shield DR is being increased from 8% to 10%, and that's the node where if you are spending mana, you are getting your like a damage reduction. So it should end up being at a 30% DR. So if you can kind of keep that up, that's going to be an additional 6% DR. And Sorc's been really needing more damage reduction. Key passives, combustion burn damage is now going up to 60%, I believe. And then Shatter is getting a little bit of a damage buff. It's going from 30% to 45%. However, it's getting kind of giga nerfed, and that Shatter no longer receives damage from itself. So no longer are you going to be able to like freeze an entire group of enemies, like blow one up, and then it shatters out onto all the other ones. That kills one of them, which also explodes and just like kind of cascading damage. Shatter's no longer going to be like super great for that, which might hurt Sorc's ability to kind of do high-end content, but we'll have to see. In terms of items, actual conduit, if they fixed a bug where the explosion wasn't doing as much damage as it was supposed to. Personally, when I played it in the PTR, it was doing almost too much damage, but I think that that bug is probably also adjusted. Splintering energy, the damage increase on this from 15 to 30 to 25 to 40%. So it's pretty much like casting a lightning spear now gives you a 40% damage boost for 3 seconds. I kind of wish that they made this like a 5-second buff. Like a 3-second buff to me is kind of like an awkward amount of time, especially because the animation probably takes you about like almost like maybe half a second to a second to actually get that thing out. So yeah, like this is still pretty good, but I think they're probably, this is still pretty good. If you want to like do a conjuration focus, you definitely want to do this. But yeah, lightning rod has been changed. A lot of people were complaining about the lightning rod aspect. It now has a 25% chance to deal up to 80% increased damage, and so that's like a 20% damage increase. But this chance is doubled against bosses and crowd controlled enemies and prefers them as targets. So it's like a 40% damage increase, which makes it a very solid option with the actual conduit. And it like will help you like target against bosses specifically. So like if you get a whole bunch of ads, it's more likely to bounce to the boss. Ice armor is getting a big buff here with Snow Veiled. If you don't know, it used to be give you a bonus to armor, which didn't do anything because we had armor cap now. And so now we're getting just a flat 25% DR for up to 5 seconds, which is pretty nice, especially if you can like keep Snow Veiled up with some of the stuff we'll talk about here in a little bit. That's like significant amount of unstoppable and damage reduction. This kind of can almost like let you drop Flame Shield from your build altogether and just kind of rely on ice armor. For Paragon, we're seeing a lot of buffs. So Burning Instinct, the cap is now going up to 80%, and it's changed to 1% per 20 intelligence. Ceaseless Conduit, now the damage cap is going to be at 120%. It's 2% per 20 intelligence. I've never seen anybody make Crackling Energy actually work as a build, and I think it still probably needs a little bit more love than this. I think Crackling Energy could just like be doubled or tripled in base damage, and that would probably bring it up, but you know, we have to see. Elemental Summoner, now the damage cap bonus of this is 60%, and the scaling from cold, fire, and lightning is increased from 5% to 20%. So this should probably be easy to cap off and pretty good for a summoner. Frigid Fate, which is probably one of the most popular nodes for Sorc, is getting a bump up from 30% to 60%. So since pretty much every Sorc build takes this particular node, that's like another 30% buff basically for all Sorcs, which is pretty insane. So remember, we're already at like a 50% buff. So if we take another that much, we're basically doubling the damage of all Sorcs now at this point, which is quite a bit. The scaling damage from cold has been increased from 10 to 20%, which is going to make it pretty easy or easier to stack this out. And also there's some stuff down below that's going to make it easy to cap that out almost with one item. Searing Heat, the damage bonus cap has been increased up to 60%. So if you're using both Frigid Fate and Searing Heat, it's going to get pretty hot in the kitchen. Sorc is definitely going to be cooking next season. The scaling for damage with fire, just like the previous one with cold, is going from 10 to 20%. And then Icefall, the damage increase going from 18 up to 25%, which is pretty nice. I did catch all of the uniques for the Sorcs, so we can go over them real quick. So the Staff of Liam Neeson's, or Liam Essen, I guess you could say, has a couple big changes. And one of the things to note here is they do change the implicit on uniques a little bit. So previously it was damage to crowd-controlled enemies, but now it's 170% lightning damage implicit, and it has up to 360 intelligence on it, which, if you consider the fact that you can go and get that as a greater affix, that's 540 intelligence on a staff, which, if we divide that by 8, that's 67.5% multiplicative damage on your staff as the very first modifier on it. Not bad for a staff that I've never used before. I think that alone kind of helps it make up for not really having a damage aspect in the unique. You do have to remember this intelligence is going to be really, really big for damage. And even though the unique aspect still doesn't really truly provide like a damage increase, it still kind of does allow the charge bolts to hit the same target. So there's up to a 75% chance now for the charge bolts to cast twice. So if you go and get this GA'd, you are already going to always be casting charge bolts twice, and you don't even need to masterwork this at all, which is like doubling your damage once again with this particular staff. And then you have 45% resource cost reduction. If that's GA, that's up to 67.5% resource cost reduction. And like with resource cost reduction, you really do want like big singular sources of it, because it's like multiplicative with other sources. And so getting that pushed up is pretty good. You can get up to 6 ranks with charged bolt, which means you're going to be really getting pretty high rank there. And then lastly, the unique effect now goes all the way up to 80%. So your casts of charged bolt 80% of the time are going to go like significantly farther and actually track onto enemies, which means against bosses, you're going to be absolutely blowing them up. And I am most certainly going to do a build with the Staff of Liam Neeson's next season, because I think that it's just going to have a certain set of skills that are going to really annihilate enemies. Next up, we have Fractured Winterglass. So this, the implicit hasn't changed here. It's going to still have all resistance, which I think is pretty good. But now, instead of having just like 19 to 26 non-physical damage, that's going all the way up to 75% non-physical damage, which is pretty stinking massive. And this kind of gives us an idea of maybe how Tal Rasha's is going to look, which is insane. Now, the tempering mod that we're getting on this is a 17.5% chance to cast Frozen Orb twice. Now, I do kind of think that this is a little bit low. You're probably going to want this on your weapon and on your offhand, but you have to remember that with these tempering mods like this, you can actually still land this as a greater aspect, right? So 17.5 times 1.5, you're looking at like 26.25% chance. And if you, let's say you got the 2 tempers on your other weapon, this is 61.25% chance, just baseline without any masterworking or anything like that. And just one greater aspect, which I think is pretty cool. Next up is kind of a contentious line on it, which is conjuration cooldowns are reduced by 0.1 to 0.3 seconds when a frozen orb explode. And I'm assuming that since this is because you can like get the double orb explode aspect, you can probably get this masterworked and greater aspect up to like -1 second on all of your cooldowns of conjurations per cast. Now, I don't personally think that this is that good for the like normal build of this, because you pretty much want to be casting Frozen Orb all of the time. So I kind of wish that this was different, and it kind of feels like this is supposed to be like empowering a conjuration focus build instead. And so I wish there was a separate version of this that was like, I don't know, just different, like some other line here than this. Although this is really cool, like if it was, I don't even know what you would want here, but just something different, like maybe like chance for Frozen Orb to cast 3 times or something like that, or even 4 times, to be its like own separate. You can only have it on this one particular spot, and just like, or it's like chance to, so all frozen orbs spin out from you in a circle or rotate around you or something. I don't know. I don't particularly like this mod here, but we'll see how it works out. Now the Conjuration Mastery is also going up to 3 to 4 ranks, which is pretty good because at 2 Conjuration Mastery on uniques, that's typically not that great. You would have to hit it 2 times with Masterworking in order to get it up to a +4. And I don't even know how high it's going to go now because I didn't have the data for something that's a unique that has +4 ranks. So we're going to have to find out if they changed the calculation for this. But it's going to be quite stinking good. I'm going to guess you could probably get this up to 8 ranks of Conjuration Mastery. And if you remember, Conjuration Mastery gives you 1% damage, 1% movement speed, and 2% mana regen for each active conjuration. So that's like 8% just multiplicative damage for each conjuration you get out. This is actually pretty stinking massive for what we have. Now for the unique effect, I pretty much just put this here in like a kind of a little chart. So the old effect was there's a 35 to 50% chance to spawn a random conjuration. Now this goes all the way up to 65%, which is pretty good. This is when it explodes. So I think you can get like multiple procs off of this. And the second one was lucky hit. Your conjurations have up to a 70% chance to launch a frozen orb. Now it's up to 90%. Now, while this one's good, I wish this was also accompanied with a little bit of love for the lucky hit chance for your conjurations, because it's just pitiful. Hydra has a 3% lucky hit chance as a baseline. 3%. And I'm pretty sure because, you know, this has a duration to it, that's not a 3% per hit, but that's a 3% per spawn of Hydra, like averaged out across the entire length of the Hydra. So it just doesn't happen as much as you want. Lightning Spear also has 5%, which is pretty bad. And then Ice Blades has 15%. So I do think it's kind of stinky to have lucky hit chance increase next to like the worst lucky hit chance skill in the entire game. I'm like 95% positive that this was like in the mid 20s back in the beta before everybody was playing Hydra and like carrying all the dungeons. But hopefully that's something they work on. Last but not least, we have a ring that I have never used before in any build. And yeah, now this thing is probably borderline broken. This thing is a great example of how they want uniques that are for a specific build to be on par with mythic uniques. The Blue Rose is a great example of this. So before it had crit damage, a little bit of ice spike damage, a little bit of lucky hit, like 6% at the cap, and then a little bit of mana cost reduction up to 16%. Now it's going to have the same implicit it did before, all res, cold res, but then you have up to 11% critical strike chance, which is really good. Rings are like one of the only places you can get crit chance, so this is nice to have. And it's going to go up to 170% cold damage. You heard that right, 170% cold damage, which means if you find this on GA, you're looking at 255, which can be really good for all those Paragon nodes that have been buffed up. Like Frigid Fate, it's going to help you basically cap this out because the cold damage is increased quite a bit here. And it's just pretty good. If you want to do Elemental Summoner, this is going to help cap that out as well. I don't know if you'd want to do Blue Rose with Conjurations, but maybe just for the capping would be pretty nice. And then you get up to 350% Ice Spike damage with this, which I think is just ludicrous because if you hit this on a GA, that's 525%. Just 525% damage for like Ice Spike is nuts. Absolutely nuts to me. And then last but not least, you have up to a 35% chance for Ice Spikes to explode twice, which once again, you can hit with the GA. So just baseline, that'd be 52.5%. And that is like a multiplier. That is a multiplier because if like one Ice Spike does 10 damage and 35% of the time you hit for a second 10 damage, that's like 35% more damage. So this, if it hits GA without any masterworking, is 52.5% more damage for all of your Ice Spikes from all of sources. And then last but not least, the unique effect for this particular ring has been increased from a top end of 2,700 to 4412. So I'm not sure how big of a deal that is per se, but increasing the base damage of something is typically pretty nuts. And that's pretty much all of the stuff I wrote down. I do know that Rob also has his own sheet where he has some own stuff. Maybe I'll put that link in the description as before. Some of the organization of this might change as well. So, you know, just keep an eye out for this. Like I said, this is just like some of the high level notes that they've shared with us so far. All of this stuff is definitely pending to change. We're going to find out probably after the Spiritborn stuff all drops. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let me know what class you think you're going to start. I, for sure, am going to be starting the Sorcerer and, you know, come by the stream. Have a good one. Check my content for Spiritborn. We'll be having a whole bunch of stuff drop on the 18th. See you next time. Bye-bye.